Welcome back everyone to yet another session of the NTT classes. Today we will be dealing with barriers to effective communication. So we will be dealing with the obstacles that is presented for the effective communication. Effective communication we have already established is very much essential for the meaningful interactions, whether it be in in our personal relationships or in the professional settings or in the educational environments. So, in this class, we will be dealing in detail about the common barriers to the communication, what are the nature of these specific barriers, and the impact, and how will how will we mitigating each of them. Okay, so first we will be dealing with the little bit overview of the barriers. The barriers can be divided into physical barrier, perceptual barrier, linguistic, emotional, cultural, interpersonal, and psychological. Okay, physical barrier, perceptual, linguistic or language barrier, emotional barrier, cultural barriers, interpersonal barriers, and psychological barrier. Okay, so first one we will be dealing with the physical barriers. Physical means what? Tangible objects. Okay, it is a tangible objects that can disrupt the communication flow. It can be noise, environmental noise. It can be a distance. For example, I am in a certain room and the other person is in a different building. So how can I communicate when the distance is creating the barrier? So that is what the separation in the remote work areas. And environmental noise, for example, in the factories, in the traffic or machinery or crowds, it is difficult for us to communicate, right? So that becomes an important one. Next and the last one is the technology failures. For example, I'm taking class now. If my mic doesn't work, it becomes a barrier, right? This physical object, that is a mic, which is not working, so that becomes a physical barrier. So mainly we have three kinds of physical barriers, that are the environmental factors or environmental noise, distance, that is geographical distance, then technological issues or technological failures that will interrupt the communication. Fine. So these are the major physical barriers. Now going into perceptual barrier. Perceptual barrier is the interpretation. Everyone doesn't perceive a certain message as the same thing, right? If the sender is not effective in communicating, then what happens? Because of the differences in their perceptions, it can be interpreted in various forms, right? For example, in this figure, you can see this person is communicating through this image. This person is communicating through this image is to be a square, but this person is seeing the same object from a different angle and it becomes a triangle. Okay, the shape becomes a triangle. So this is actually the problem in perception. Fine. The same message can be interpreted in different ways by on the base of their perception. Fine. So this perception is mainly influenced by their personal experience or cultural background or individual aptitudes. On the basis of that, we can again divide this perceptual barriers into selective perception. Okay, selective perception, stereotyping, emotional influence. Okay, selective perception is actually individuals may perceive only what they want to see or want to hear. Okay, if for example, if I don't like someone, I won't be hearing half of the thing they will say. Or if I believe something, if I have any previous prejudices, then I won't be listening to a new idea with an open mind. So that creates a selective perception. We will be filtering out information based on our own beliefs or expectations. So that will lead to what? Incompleteness. Okay, that will lead to incompleteness of the understanding. Okay, so that is the problem with the selective perception. Next one is stereotyping. The same thing. Preconceived notions or stereotypes about any person or any influences that can influence the way the message is received or interpreted. Okay, that will again lead to what? That will again lead to incomplete understanding and also unfair judgments. Okay, judgment will be unfair on the basis of that. Is why when we study homeopathy, first and foremost, what are we told to practice? We should be an unprejudiced observer. So if we don't stereotype a person, we will be open to listen to whatever they say. Fine, that is about stereotyping. Then emotional influences. Emotional influences, if for example, if someone is angry or stressed, okay, and if someone is angry or stressed about a certain situation and they are brought to comment on the same situation, they won't be having a neutral opinion. They will not have a neutral opinion. That emotional state or the state of being angry or stressed, that will immensely influence their interpretation. Okay, so emotional influence can again influence the color of perception of a message. Fine. So you have to be for being neutral, you have to be psychologically fine, you have to be emotionally devoid of any influence, you should be unprejudiced, and you should be able to hear, you should be able to use all your senses completely. Then only the perceptual barriers can be mitigated. Fine. Next, these are the certain perceptual barriers which I was talking about. We have stereotyping, we've already dealt with. Mental filters, same thing. We'll be filtering out information, same as that of selective perception. Projection, we'll be projecting our own ideas to another person's message. So that will again lead to false receiving of the message. Expectations, we'll already have preconceived ideas or notion or expectations of certain thing, right? On the basis of that, again the perception or the image will be misinterpreted. Again, misinterpretation of non-verbal cues. In the previous videos we have dealt with the non-verbal cues and how the verbal cues are different for each of the different cultures. So similarly, if the people are from different cultural background, and if one person misinterprets their non-verbal cue, for example, one person is nodding the head and that is according to them they are saying yes, but the other person might interpret it as no. So that will be misinterpretation of verbal cue. That is also a perceptual barrier because they are perceiving that yes, what they're saying as to be no. Fine. Next, cultural misunderstanding, same thing. Then language differences, that will be dealing in the next one. Language barriers is a major one which is affecting the communication. If the person is not thorough in a certain language, then the communication in that language becomes difficult. So not only the language, even the dialect, even in India, the language differs from region to region in a state itself. For example, take Kerala. So in Kerala itself, the language dialect differs from the north to the southern districts, right? So it is different. The same way in Tamil Nadu and Andhra and Karnataka, and even in the northern states, all the dialects are different. If one is not thorough or one doesn't have a proper idea of these dialects, these words or certain non-verbal cues can be misinterpreted. So that becomes a barrier towards a effective communication. Fine. And next one is jargon. Jargon is actually what? Using of technical terminologies. A doctor using hi-fi technical terminologies in front of a patient who is a layman or maybe an illiterate, that will create a difficulty in communicating with them, right? Using hypertension is a technical terminology which all may not know, especially an illiterate person. So instead of that, if we can use a layman language, that is blood pressure, to make them understand they are suffering from, or yeah, their value of blood pressure is so and so. So uses of different languages or dialects or jargon that can create misunderstanding in between two individuals or two backgrounds. So that becomes a major one. First one, technical or jargon language. I've already mentioned it is the complex terminology which is involved in all the fields. So medical field has its own complex terminology. The engineering field, the mathematical field, the physical and the chemistry field, and every field has its own complex terminology which cannot be used in a common area, okay, which cannot be used to a common layman person. So that has to be kept in mind so that the listener can properly receive the image. If the listener is belonging from the medical community, they can understand medical terms. But if they are not, that creates a misunderstanding. Okay, that cannot be understood and that can even lead to confusions. Fine. So that is the problem when we use jargon or technical language, when the communication bit is between people from different field of their education, different professional field. Next is language differences. Language differences can even be complete different language or different dialects or different accent or different proficiency, right? Different dialects I've already mentioned, a same language with different dialects of the certain state or certain country. Accent, English accent of different English, like the British English, American English, or Indian English has, or even Australian English have different accent which cannot be understood by the other person, right? If you have had the opportunity to hear Irish accent, we will not absolutely understand a single term if we are not thorough with it. If you are not listening 5 or 10 or 100 times also, it will be difficult for us. So the accent matters. Okay. Proficiency. If you are not proficient, if the vocabulary of the certain language is not proficient, we won't be able to communicate properly. If a person who is from Tamil Nadu is going for a course or going to give a talk in the rural districts of Karnataka, it will be difficult for them to communicate, even though they have broken Kannada knowledge. Okay, even though they have broken Kannada knowledge, they won't be able to proficiently communicate with the people of the village of in interior rural Karnataka. So similarly, the proficiency of language is important to avoid miscommunication. Okay, even if the people are having same language or regional dialect or accent, then also certain problems can occur. Fine. Next is ambiguity. Ambiguity is using of vague language. Okay, vague or ambiguous language that can um, create misconception because of the lack of clarity. Because ambiguous means what? Vague means, or ambiguous means the clarity is not there. If the clarity of the language is not there, that will again create misinterpretation, also confusion. Fine. So one of the language barriers, if you see in this figure, I've mentioned these two. Danger, the term danger can mean one thing in English, in one another language it can mean luck. Okay. Similarly, the um, date and time, right? Sorry, date, the format of date is different for American English and British English or Indian English. It is different. We will be writing date, month and year, right? But in American English it is month, day or date and year. That is how it works. In certain other languages it is year coming first, then the month and the date. So it differs from place to place. So that is why we have to be careful in communicating certain things when we are dealing with these many languages. Okay. Next is emotional barriers. Emotional barriers we have already dealt with. It is actually internal factors or communicators' emotions or the receiver's emotions that will lead to again misinterpretation or various troubles in the communication, can interfere in the communication process. The first one is fear of rejection. If there is a fear of rejection, the person who is communicating, if the person who is sending the information, they will withhold certain thoughts or certain information because they are scared of getting rejected, right? So that creates an important barrier for the proper effective communication. Next one, stress and anxiety. If the stress and anxiety is playing a major role while communicating, that can again lead to miscomprehension or misunderstanding or missing of certain cues. Okay. So that will, whenever there is a high level of stress or anxiety, that can cloud what? That can cloud the judgment. Whenever the judgment is clouded, their concentration will be impaired, and that will make it difficult to process the information. Okay, whatever information that is received, that the processing of information is reduced. That is why it will lead to impairment of the comprehension. Next one is mistrust. If the communicators, the sender and the receiver, do not have a proper trust or proper rapport, then what? There will be a defensive atmosphere, defensive response or defensive atmosphere that will be created because the for example, let's take a strict teacher and a delinquent student. Okay, strict teacher and delinquent student. So there you can see there is a mistrust. Strict teacher will not have a trust on the delinquent student. So what happens? The teacher won't be properly telling whatever is there in their mind, right? So similar way, the delinquent student doesn't like the strict teachers, right? So what happens? They'll emotionally form a wall in between them and the teacher, thereby they will not receive any information from the teacher. That is called as defensive response or defensive atmosphere, that is caused because of a lack of trust. Okay. So hereby the messages will either be not received at all. If it is received, it can be misinterpreted, or else what happens, the responder or the receiver might respond negatively. That is what happens in a classroom setting if the proper communication doesn't occur, or the mistrust is there in between the students and the teachers. Next is the yeah, this is another emotional barriers, right? All these emotional barriers: fear of rejection, we dealt with three of them here, these are other ones. Then anger, low self esteem, then past trauma, social anxiety, depression, guilt, jealousy, pride, grief, overwhelmed, impatience, resentment, insecurity, burnout, intolerance, cynicism, shame, nostalgia, euphoria. All these are actually extremes of emotions, right? This will lead to barriers in the communication. These are emotional barriers to the communication. These are certain examples of this. Okay. Anything, any emotion, if it is extreme, that can lead to barrier to the communication process. Next is cultural barriers. Cultural barriers, we have already mentioned about the different cultural backgrounds, the high context and low context cultures, and how they create a, or how the understanding of them create a effective communication. So here, the same way, this cultural differences can also cause barrier to the communication, right? So the values, so values, beliefs, customs, and communication styles are different in different settings, right? Whenever we are in an international forum, this creates a maximum problem. Fine. The cultural norms are different of certain countries, of non-verbal cues and the usage of non-verbal cues and the directness. The Western countries, they are more direct, while the Eastern countries, South Asian countries, are more indirect in their communication, right? So high context and low context culture, they create a very much issue in the cultural norms, and they can create a barrier for the proper communication. So thereby we have to be careful in understanding the non-verbal cues and also about the context of the speech when they talk. Next is language and communication style. I've already mentioned about the high and low context cultures and how it's different. So communication style is different. So we have to understand about these different kinds of communication styles to understand what they're trying to convey. Okay, so maybe usage of certain words or phrases that can lead to misunderstanding in certain cultures. So that was important in the under the cultural barriers. Next is cultural sensitivity. If there is no mutual respect or awareness or sensitivity to different cultures, that can offend. Okay, that can offend the people who are involved in the conversation. So it is important to respect the cultural diversity in the communication. Okay, otherwise it can create various issues. Fine. So that was about cultural barriers. We have to be careful about cultural norms, language and communication style, and cultural sensitivity. Okay. Next, coming to interpersonal barriers. Okay, interpersonal barriers, we have mentioned about power dynamics. Okay, if the power dynamics is imbalanced, if it is not balanced, then that will lead to problems, right? For example, in a job settings, in a professional settings where there is a manager or a employee or a teacher and student, there is a imbalance between power, right? There is an imbalance between power. So that will be creating, yeah, that will create walls, imaginary walls in between the two communicators, that will lead to hesitancy. Okay, the less powerful individual have hesitancy in communicating or talking or conversing with the person of the higher power. If, for example, in a student teacher setting, the student is of low power individual, right? It is, when we consider the power balance, the student is actually less powerful individual than the teacher in a classroom setting, right? So if the teacher and student does not have a proper trust, or any rapport is not at all built, then what happens? The student is not that comfortable in communicating openly with the teacher, because if the student says something that will offend the teacher, and if the teacher is very much strict, then what happens? Teacher might give punishment. So fearing those repercussions, what happens? There will be a barrier to the communication, okay, in between the teacher and student. So that is why power dynamics and the proper balance has to be maintained in the power dynamics in a situation, or in any situation, may it be office, may it be in the classroom, or may it be in the clinic. Okay, next one is conflict. If there are problems, or yeah, conflicts in between a sender and receiver in a communication setting, then what happens? If there is a problem, if two individuals are in a fight and they have to communicate properly. If the manager and the employee have undergone a personal fight, that will affect their individual performances, and that will again distort the communication because of the negative emotions involved in between them, right? Also, another example, if a teacher and the student, the same example, the teacher and the student are related, or they might have undergone a fight or some kind of problems in between them personally, maybe a day or two back, and the next day or day after tomorrow there might be a test, or there might be a situation where teacher has to communicate certain thing to a group of students and this student is involved. Then what happens, the teacher might keep that in mind when talking to this particular student. The same way, the student might not be that open to that teacher either. Fine. And similarly, if in a team, okay, when we take a team or a group of individual, they have to make a project. Okay, they have to make a project, and for example, if this person has fought with this person, that will do what, there won't be a proper support given to each other in a group project. I have already mentioned there has to be proper delegation and there has to be proper communication between the team. So they won't communicate properly, that will distort this communication, and that will lead to what, that will lead to the end product being spoiled, right? Next is lack of rapport. So same thing, if the rapport is not there, maybe patient, doctor, student, teacher, or manager, employee, there will not be any willingness to listen. If the person does not listen, then obviously the communication will not be taking place in a proper manner. So they have to be mutual respect, and rapport has to be created so that misunderstandings do not occur. Fine. Next important barrier is psychological barrier. Psychological barrier, same thing as that of emotional, but there are a little bit more points here. We have to learn about the cognitive biases. Okay, cognitive biases, assumptions, and mental health issues. The emotional barriers which I have mentioned, that also can come into play in psychological barriers. So if the person, I've already mentioned about the mental states and emotions in emotional barriers, right? So mental states like anger or distrust, or the anger, distress, or attention, lack of attention, all these things are there, that can again lead to that can influence the person in how they interpret the emotions. Okay, so whenever a person is angry or sad, if they are told to do something, they might not take it positively. For example, a person has undergone accident and they are admitted with a fracture of a knee or something, and if the doctor at that moment tries to keep on giving advices, or if the person's parents keep on blaming them for what has happened, might be they might be careless, or this might not have happened if you were a little more careful, if that is the information that they give at that moment of time when the person is vulnerable, the person might not react favorably, or they might not be even ready to listen to what the other person is saying. So all these situations of the internal factors or the individual's mental state has to be understood when the communication is taking place. Fine. So cognitive biases, I have already mentioned about the familiar situations or familiar information, right? So individuals have biases. Okay, individual will have biases when they interpret information. How much ever we try, we cannot be a completely unpressurized observer, right? So similarly, there might be a certain bias that we carry with ourselves, right? So that will influence how we interpret an information. Okay. Next, assumptions. So before knowing about an individual, or before knowing completely about the information, there might be assumptions that is made by the societal knowledge, or might be certain other source, right? So assumptions should be avoided, because assumptions can lead to what, that can lead to lack of clarification. Clear communication will not be there if assumptions are made, pre-made assumptions are kept. Mental health issues, again, all the emotional barriers, what they do, they affect the focus, and leading to improper communication. So these are the major barriers of effective communication, psychological barriers, interpersonal barriers, cultural barriers, then emotional barriers, language, and perceptual, and finally the physical barriers. Physical barriers are the most easier ones to remember. You have to remember about these stereotyping and also about the emotions, okay, that play in the language or communication. Fine. So we have to recognize all these barriers which can occur in the communication, and we have to address these barriers to improve the communication in any context. Okay, so that is the major thing that we try to understand by learning this. Fine. Next, moving on to the important section, that is mass media and society. This also is a way of communication, right? So mass media and society does what? It disseminates the information, right? It gathers a certain information and tries to broadcast it to larger audience. Okay, what are the mass media? They are the television, radio, newspaper, magazines, and digital media. Digital media means the social media and also public opinion platforms and everything, right? So what do? They influence the society. How do they influence? They shape the public opinion. Everything is done via mass media right now, right? All the information that you get in this century is via the mass media, maybe TV or radio, newspapers, and mostly now it is, in this decade, it is digital media, right? So we learn about the role of this mass media. What do? They disseminate the information. Okay, they disseminate the information means they provide the public with the information about what? Everything, current events, social issues, entertainment, everything via news broadcast, articles, online platforms. Okay, so whatever is happening locally and globally, that is spread to the public. Okay, that is spread to the public via the mass media. This is the primary role. There is a primary role of mass media. Next is education. So you might have studied about Swayam Prabha, right? Swayam Prabha and Swayam Prabha. So what is a Swayam Prabha? Swayam Prabha is a educational platform. Through what? Through television channels, right? DTH channels. Similarly, through news. Other than the Swayam Prabha program which I mentioned, this mass media or the news channels also help in increasing it also has a educational function. How? Through educational programs, through documentaries, through informatory articles. Okay, even though there can be a little bit opinions included with the facts, but basically it is actually to increase public knowledge on variety of topics. It can be science, history, health, technology, anything under the sun nowadays can be found in the mass media, right? So education is another one. So next one is education. You can take another example. If the person has to learn about a new skill, for example, playing violin or playing guitar or flute or learning crocheting or learning knitting, so anything can be directly found in the YouTube. YouTube is a form of mass media, right? So anything, if you want to learn how to do certain thing, even um, yeah even switching on something or setting up a printer, everything is found in the YouTube itself, right? So it also acts as a platform of education, right? Next is cultural transmission. Cultural transmission, it is actually shaping societal norms, values, and traditions. So through this mass media, various people, various international films, music, everything is broadcasted via this mass media, right? Maybe radio. Radio was the primary aspect initially, then it became TV, now it is social media. So everything is broadcasted and reached to the broader audiences, right? So different culture. For example, I can sit in Karnataka and learn about Hong Kong culture. I can sit in Kerala and learn about Assamese culture or watch Assamese movies. Or similarly, I can sit in maybe in interiors of maybe Sri Lanka and learn about Indian culture, or example Thailand culture. So similarly, this culture is fostered. Okay, global culture is fostered or grown or transmitted through the entire world via this mass media. Okay, so that is very much important. when we speak about mass media. Socialization and cultural transmission is very much important. Socialization, I mentioned, it is yeah, societal topics, right? For example, there are movies, if you take Bollywood, there are movies taken up by Akshay Kumar, Ayushman Khurrana, and certain people. And yeah, most of the Bollywood, Tollywood, everyone has. So these societal norms and values that can be either judged or opinionated, or it can be even broken down, or it can be even built via this mass media. Okay, media content can influence the viewers actions or reactions or perceptions on these things. Okay, television shows or movies or advertisements, these can influence the people's perception on gender roles, family structures, and social behaviors. That is the major way it is used. Okay, socialization, that is another important um, function or role of mass media, is actually portrayal or influencing people's perception on the society. Fine. Next, public opinion formation, right? You can see now through social media various influences, yeah, influencing people's opinion. That is a public opinion formation, right? So various people might influence the public by putting out their own opinion. Okay, some people might agree, some people might not agree, but an opinion is formed, right? So that can shape this opinion. So these influencers could not do that unless and until they had Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or whatever. Okay, all these all these points or all these things of so mass media help them in sharing their opinion, and when they share, others can listen to it, and they can formulate their own opinion based on that one. Okay, so that can influence how the public perceives a certain issue, and also how it can affect the policy. Okay, based on all these, nowadays we have you not YouTube, media polls, right? Polls on whether this has to be considered right or wrong. So all these things are reviewed by the government. Usually it is reviewed by the government, and on the basis of that, public policies can even be made. Okay, social media campaign or political campaigns can be done via this mass media, right? For example, the elections, during the elections, there are predictors, right? Predictors on how who will win and all those things. That is due to the influence of mass media, right? Next important one is entertainment. That is the major one. Another vital function of the mass media: movies, TV shows, music, songs, and video games. All the entertainment is via mass media now, right? So that again creates a global popularity, and everything can be created via this mass media. Okay, these are the functions of mass media in society. First and foremost, and primary role is the information dissemination. Then comes the education, cultural transmission, socialization, public opinion formation, and entertainment. Fine. Now the impact. Now all these things have two kinds of impact. Obviously, it will be a positive impact or a negative impact, right? So through education, information, entertainment, and the cultural unison, there is a positive impact, but there are negative impacts also. What are the negative impact? Media bias. See, nowadays what happens is that whatever is shown in the media, it might not be the fact, even though it has to be. It might not be the fact, it can be the opinions, right? It can be a media opinion or biases of the people who are the presenters of the certain media. They will be forming their own opinions, and they will be transmitting that to the wider audience. That will create a bias. Okay, if a person who is watching CNN might have a different opinion by another person who is watching CBS. These are different broadcasting services of different political influences that can create various differences. So skewed reporting can be due to political or commercial interests by the person who owns certain media platforms. They can influence these media. Next is the misinformation. Lots of, because this media is available publicly and to everyone, there can be formation of misinformation or fake news. Lots of fake news you have been seeing, right? in the past decade or so, the amount of fake news is much more higher than the facts. So increase in fake news with the digital media that can lead to public confusion. mm, in certain months back, there was a news of certain celebrity who was actually alive and healthy. The news was about their death. So similarly, it can occur, right? Misinformation, fake news via digital media. So all the news or all the information that we get via this mass media is not actually true. We have to always cross check for the legibility and also the correctness. Okay. Next is cultural homogenization. Cultural homogenization is actually globalization. Okay. Because the mass media, because all the, yeah, if we take Netflix for example, movies which is releasing in US can directly be available to us, right? So local movies which are also being released. For example, there are two movies which are releasing in the theaters. One is a Marvel movie, or one is for example, by a celebrated director of the West. Another one is a small time producer, small time director, but the movies are good, but first time director. So what will the public choose? Public will always choose the famous director one, right? So what happens here is the local film industry will suffer because of the globalization. Okay. Because of the cultural homogenization, because there will be overshadowing of the global reach. Okay. Usually western influences are very much ingrained into our own culture, right? So what happens is that most of the times local cultures are overshadowed by, why? Because yeah, there might be a thought process like, yeah, local culture means local movies are otherwise also we'll get to watch, but other one we won't be able to watch. So that will create a impact on the local businesses and local industries. Okay. So I hope that is clear. Because of the globalization, that can overshadow the local culture. That is the important one. Fine. Next is privacy concerns. Privacy concerns. See, because social media platforms and digital platforms, what happens? Privacy is non-existent. Okay, non-existent for lots of people. Because of fake calls and scam calls, you might have heard, right? All our private details are available with those people. And even if you take a celebrity, nothing of their life is private now. Everything is full on the social media and other digital platforms. So thereby, to get more news or get more information, their privacy might be invaded. Okay. So lots of scandals might occur, lots of scandals, and without their knowledge, their private life might be exposed. So certain things are also a concern about the mass media. Okay, with that we will yeah, that was about the mass media influence and the impact on society. Major ones is the media bias and the fake news, and also the other things that come along with that, that is cultural homogenization and privacy concerns that affects the individuals involved. Okay. Next important thing is about the teacher student communication, teacher learner communication. So now we are slowly going into the educational process. So here there has to be, okay, there has to be a proper teacher learner communication, right? So to do that, there has to be certain things we have to know about the verbal and non-verbal exchanges and the importance of the teacher student communication. Fine. So, what does it involve? The communication involves instructional tools, active interactions, and supportive feedback. These are the three cornerstones of the teacher learner communication, right? First and foremost, we will learn about the importance. So, what is the importance? What is the need of the teacher learner communication? First one, it facilitates understanding. Proper teacher learner communication, teacher student communication, that will lead to what? That will lead to proper, clear, effective communication. That will lead to conveying, the proper conveying of ideas. See, the teacher is actually a learned scholar, right? So the teacher, to convey their ideas, convey their knowledge to the student, right, their concepts or complex ideas to the student, the teacher has to be able to properly convey it to them, right? So that will be via this proper effective communication with the teacher and the student. Okay, if the teacher is not having a proper rapport, the communication won't occur, the teacher will not be able to convey their learnings. Okay, the student will not learn anything. So first and foremost, for facilitating understanding, the teacher student communication has to be proper. Next one, building rapport. If the teacher is shy or teacher is overly strict, the trust and rapport will not occur. If that is not there, the student won't trust the teacher, and that will lead to again miscommunication. Okay, the teacher will not be perceived as what approachable and supportive, right? All the students like a teacher who is approachable and supportive. Okay, so always we have to build, the teacher has to build a positive relationship with the student. Okay, so next one is encouraging active participation. If the teacher is boring, in simple terminology, if the teacher is boring, and if the teacher is maybe angry, or certain negative emotions are there in the teacher which the students can perceive, that will not lead any active participation. So effective communication with the students from the teachers, that will encourage the students to participate actively. You can only take your own example. In certain classes, if the teacher is not good, we won't be actively participating in the discussions in the class, right? But if the teacher is if the teacher is very good, and if they are properly communicating with us, then we will be happy, or we will be answering to their questions, and there will be a creative or active participation in the class discussions, right? Asking questions and expressing the thoughts and opinions. That is how the critical thinking helps, right? Socratic learning method, which we have learned in the learning methods, right? That was about the critical thinking, the development of critical thinking. That only happens when there is an active participation. And for active participation to be there, the teacher learner communication has to be perfect. If not perfect, at least good. Next one is providing feedback. Providing feedback, it is very much essential. Because why? Because it helps the student understand their student's strength, and areas for improvement of their academic development, right? So if the teacher is able to give proper and good constructive feedback, okay, not only feedback, it should be constructive good feedback, okay? Constructive feedback, then that will help the students. Okay, that will help the students in improving. Okay, that will help the students in improving. If the feedback is negative and discriminative feedback, that will cause low energy, and also the full esteem of the student will be affected. Okay, low esteem and also the energy of the student will be affected, and that will not be good for the teacher student relationship. Fine. So key benefits I've already mentioned. First and foremost is to facilitate understanding, building a rapport, encourage active participation, and finally to provide feedback. Now, what are the strategies? Okay, what are the strategies for enhancing the teacher learner communication? See, teacher basically they have to teach, but they also have to be a active listener. Okay, they also have to be active listener. We have to listen attentively. Okay, just not hear, we actually have to listen to the students' concerns. Okay, if the student is trying to express their concerns about certain thing, it can be personal, it can be professional, it can be regarding to a subject, but if the teacher is actually able to listen to what the student is telling, that will build the trust, that will build the rapport, and that will lead to effective or enhance, that will increase the teacher learner communication, right? So that is how the student understands that the teacher is valuing their input. Okay, so the same thing, teacher has to listen and then clarify. If the student is asking any doubt, okay, we have to listen properly and try to clarify before responding to the student's question. So that is how active listening is an important strategy for enhancing the teacher learner communication. Next important one is using multiple communication channels. Okay, so we have already learned about the different learning styles and preferences. So by using different communication methods, okay, by using lectures or videos or experiments, that will keep the engagement in between the students. And even by using visual aids or written materials, that will increase the participation. Okay, when the participation is increased, obviously the trust will also increase slowly, and that will again increase the student performance. Okay, so the teacher has to accommodate different diverse learning style. You remember about Vark learning style? Okay, also about the Gagne's rule of 9, same thing. Next is about encouraging open dialogue. Encouraging open dialogue is actually the teacher should create an environment where the student is comfortable in sharing or expressing their opinions, or the student is comfortable in asking questions. That happens in medical colleges. It can happen whenever there is a open forum, or it can happen in where happen in case of clinical discussions. That is a place where the students can easily or properly ask questions or doubt, right? So that has to be created. For that to be there, the teacher has to be open, the teacher has to be an active listener, right? So teacher will create a non-judgmental environment, and that will allow the student to openly express their opinions or doubts. Okay, so that is how the open dialogue encouragement process is there. Next important one is about the regular feedback. Regular feedback and assessment is very much important, because that will keep the student in track. Okay, that will help the student to stay on track and understand their own progress. Okay, their own progress in studying or learning. And also the teacher also should receive the feedback. Okay, if the student is not able to understand, the student should be able to communicate it with the teacher that they are not able to understand the way the teacher is explaining. So the teacher should be open to receive these feedbacks and try to improve their teaching also. So that is how regular feedback and assessment plays a major role in the teacher student communication. Fine. Next, we will learn about the doctor patient communication. So we'll just revise about the important points in the teacher student communication. So strategies of teacher student communication is important. The teacher has to be an active listener, so that will again enhance. Then using multiple channels of communication, that will also help in enhancing the thing and enhancing the communication. Then encouraging open dialogue builds a rapport, and the learning process is enhanced here. Then again, receiving feedback and giving feedback and regular assessment has to be done, so that there will be improvement both in the students side and also in the teachers teaching methods. Fine. So with that, we finish the teacher student communication. Next, most important one is about doctor patient communication. Okay, doctor patient communication is actually what it is, the communication with the doctor and patient. What is it about? It is actually the critical aspect of what healthcare. It will influence the patient outcome, it will influence satisfaction and the patient's overall well-being. Okay, if the doctor is rude, the patient will not come back. Only the doctor is not giving emotional support, that cannot help. That will kind of delay the improvement also. We as homeopaths usually, and also the holistic system of medicine and other systems also, there has to be a proper understanding or rapport creation between the patient and the doctor, so that it will aid in the healthcare. Okay, so first and foremost, we have to learn about the building of trust and rapport. Okay, building of trust and rapport. Accurate diagnosis. Okay, accurate diagnosis is facilitated via this doctor patient communication. Patient compliance, anxiety and stress, all these play an important role. Remember, accurate diagnosis, if and only if the doctor patient communication is proper, then only history. Okay, history is understood. History can be derived from the patient only if the doctor is a good communicator. Similarly, if the patient is also a good communicator, then only we'll get a history. If we get a history, then only we will be able to reach a diagnosis, right? So that is how it will facilitate an accurate diagnosis. Next one, building trust and rapport. If the doctor and the patient are properly communicating with each other, then only they'll build the trust. If and only if the patient is trusting the doctor, then only they'll share their history or their sensitive information. Okay, and only then only only then the patient will adhere to whatever treatment that the doctor is giving. If the patient doesn't trust the doctor, they will not do whatever the doctor says, or they will not even eat the medicine or even take the medicine which the doctor gives. So if and only if the communication is proper, then only the trust is built, then only the rapport is proper, then only we'll get a history. If we get the history, then only we'll get a diagnosis, proper diagnosis. And if we get a proper diagnosis, then obviously we'll get a proper treatment also. And if the patient and doctor trust is built, then only the patient will take the medicines and follow whatever the doctor is suggesting. Fine. That was the third one. Patient compliance. The compliance of the patient to follow the medical advice, to take the prescribed medication, and to do the certain lifestyle changes. For example, if a person with high LDL or high cholesterol levels are coming into clinic, and the doctor is rudely telling that the person that they have spoiled their own life by not doing exercise and so on, and they go to another doctor who is suggesting it's okay that you have gained so and so, but it can be corrected by doing certain lifestyle changes. So the patient is more likely to listen to the second doctor who was compassionate to them, right? So similarly, if the trust and rapport are proper, okay, then only the patient will compliant or adhere to the instructions given by the doctor. Fine. Next is reducing anxiety and stress. Okay, so the effective communication between the doctor patient, that will reduce or that will elevate the anxiety, patient anxiety, because we have a diagnosis, right? Most of the time when we get a diagnosis, the patient is stressed, right? So the patient wants to be heard there. If the doctor is a good listener, then what happens, the doctor can slowly and calmly explain to the patient about their diagnosis and different treatment options or prognosis of the case or the diagnosis. All those things can be properly communicated with the patient if and only if the rapport is built properly, and also by proper doctor patient communication. Okay, that has to be created in a proper way so that that can also be communicated with the patient. Fine. So to reassure the patient, then that also requires proper effective communication. Fine. But there are certain barriers here also, right? There are certain barriers here also, which are the time constraints. All the building rapport, building trust, all this thing will require time, right? But in case of busy medical practitioners, right? In case of, for example, government hospitals, there are a large volume of patients coming to see the consultants, right? So the consultation time is reduced. So that will do what? That will reduce the communication. The communication will not be complete. Okay. So that is one of the major one, that is time constraint. The communication will might be affected due to the time constraint. Next is medical jargon. I've already mentioned jargon means what? Using technical terminologies, right? Using diabetes mellitus instead of sugar, or using hypertension instead of blood pressure, or using myocardial infarction instead of heart attack, using of maybe traumatic brain injury instead of head injury, right? So all these medical technical terminologies that can create a barrier between the doctor and patient. So the doctor should always try to simplify the medical terms. Okay. Yes, otherwise what happens, the confusion will increase, right? So we also have to accommodate the patient's level of knowledge also here. Next is cultural languages, right? Cultural languages and cultural and language differences. So again, the same thing comes here. The patient and doctor might be from different backgrounds or different cultural background or different languages. Okay, so that can lead to problems in effective communication. For example, a person who is from South India who is going and studying in the North India, or vice versa, they might be finding difficult to communicate with the patients, right? So thereby the communication is hampered. Next is emotional barriers. Similarly, patient might mostly when they come to doctor, they might be having certain fear or embarrassment in talking about their problems, or they might be angry that their, for example, the dermatological patients, most of the time they will be angry that they're not able to do something for their own health or their family's health, or they might be anxious. So whenever these emotions, these are the negative emotions, whenever negative emotions are there in the person, that that can affect the communication process. Fine. So how can we try to elevate or improve this communication? First and foremost, just as how we learned about the teacher learner communication, we have to be an active listener. Doctor has to be an active listener, and along with that they have to be an empath. Okay, empathy has to be there. Okay, empathy has to be there, so that will allow the patient, okay, allow the patient in building the trust. Okay, so trust is a two-way process. Just showing that the doctor trusts the patient is not enough. The patient also has to trust the doctor. So to make the patient trust the doctor has to show or demonstrate some kind of empathy. Okay, so that the patient will properly express their concerns or express their problems without any hesitations. So active listening and empathy has to be there. And in case of jargon or using technical terminologies, we should be avoiding that by simplifying the medical languages. Okay, next one, cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity, as in any other situations, here also it is very much crucial. Doctors should take time to understand the patient's cultural background and how that can influence their health beliefs, right? For example, what vegetarians, if we get vegetarians or in vegetarians, for example, they will not be eating meat, right? They will not eat meat, they will not never eat meat. So similarly, what happens here is, we the doctors should not force the patients who might be having vitamin B12 deficiency. Vegetarians are prone to that, right? So instead we can give certain other ways to tackle their health problems without directly affecting their culture, or without directly offending their cultural beliefs. Fine, or values. So thereby the disease is also managed and the patient's cultural beliefs are also managed. Fine. So that has to be understood by the doctor. Means doctor should not be ignorant. That is what. Next is encouraging patient participation. So whenever the doctor is giving healthcare advice to the patient, there has to be a process where the patient doctor takes into consideration about the patient's opinion. For example, if the doctor is trying to say, um, trying to tell a low income household individual to consume daily broccoli, that might not be feasible for the patient, right? Because broccoli is essentially not available everywhere. So instead, the doctor can ask the patient to suggest what and all they are trying, what and all is available in their nearby market, so that from that the patient doctor can suggest certain diet, right? So similarly, that will do what, that will encourage the patients in expressing their concerns and participate about in the decision making of their life, right? Essentially, we are dealing with the patient's life, right? We can't directly go and make changes in their patient's life without without their consent. So we have to make the patient understand, and also give the patient also an active role in their health, right? Thereby the communication will be improved. Okay, so effective patient doctor communication is very much essential for achieving this positive healthcare outcome. Okay, positive healthcare outcome is actually cure or palliation, right? So by addressing these barriers which we spoke about and employing these strategies, that will promote this clear, empathetic, culturally sensitive communication, and that will enhance what, the satisfaction of the patient will be enhanced, right? Satisfaction of patient will be enhanced. And also when the satisfaction is there, the patients will do what, patient will adhere to the treatment. Okay, adhere to the treatment. So that will contribute to what, increase in the health, right? Increase health. And if that is there, that is done globally, the global health will also increase. Okay, the global health will also increase. So healthcare system is actually patient centered care, right? It should be a patient centered care. So here this effective communication is very much important. Fine. So with this we finish the communication process of this chapter essentially. So thank you for listening. We have uploaded all the videos to the playlist which you can see it in the channel. Please make sure to revise it before going to the exams. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so that the new videos, whatever we are uploading, you will get it then and there only. Otherwise, it will be difficult for you to find out other videos. Okay. So, thank you for listening. Have a nice day.